How's it going, everyone? Today we're going to learn the difference between args and kwargs in Python and how to use them in our programs. Now, before we begin, I'd just like to mention that I'll be using the Z code editor for today's video, which is coincidentally today's sponsor. If you feel like trying out Z, I've left a link in the description box down below where you can download it for free. Anyway, let's get back to the video. So, let's start with args. What are args? Well, the easiest way to explain it is by showing you how they work in a function. Here we have a function that takes args, which is short for arguments. Note how we include a leading asterisk in the variable name. This is required to specify that we want to use args here. Without the asterisk, this would just be a regular parameter name. Args allows us to pass in as many arguments as we want into a function. It then takes those arguments and puts them into a tuple for further processing. We can then decide how we want to process the tuple inside the function. For example, we could print some numbers or some random elements. And when we print the args, we get a tuple back. The first one contains these 4 numbers, and the second one contains these elements. And another thing, you can change this name to anything you like. You are not required to name it args. What's important here is the leading asterisk. As you can see in this example, I used the name elements for args here. And since this packs everything into a tuple, we can easily loop through it. When we run this, we will get each one of these elements printed to the console. If you enjoy the benefits of type annotations, you can also specify a type here. Here I'm saying that I want each one of the arguments to be of type integer. This will give Python information regarding what types this function should accept. Meaning, if we accidentally pass in an incompatible type, the static type checker will warn us. But what if you want to combine args with regular arguments? Well, at this point you will have 2 options. The first one being to define regular parameters before args. Here I decided to include a tag for this addNumbers function. So the first argument should be the tag. Then the rest will be the numbers. When we run this, you'll see that it works just fine. The second option is to define the args first, and then all the regular arguments after. But this requires us to use keyword arguments. And if we run this, we'll get the exact same output. Which one you use will depend on what you're doing. But personally, I define args first because built-in functionality tends to do it that way. For example, the first argument that the built-in print function takes is actually args. As you can see when you hover over print, the first argument is values with an asterisk. This means that the rest of the arguments can only be passed in via keyword arguments. So if we want to specify a separator, we need to do that via keyword arguments. And when we run this, we get this beautiful output. Great! Now that we understand how args work, let's move on to kwargs, which stands for keyword arguments. To define kwargs, we use 2 leading asterisks in front of a variable name. What kwargs does is convert keyword arguments into a dictionary, which we can later process inside our function. As you can see when we run this, we get a dictionary back. And just like with args, you can use any valid variable name to define them. In this example, I'll be using settings. And to call this function, we just need to provide some keyword arguments. And when we run this, we will get the brightness being set to 0.5 and the volume being set to 1.0. And if you wanted to, you can also unpack an existing dictionary into kwargs. So for this example, we created some settings, and below, we're unpacking the settings into the function. And this can be useful if you have a configuration file you want to use in several different places. As you can see, when we run this, we get these settings unpacked into the function. And that's cool and all, but how do you type kwargs? For simple kwargs, you can define the type of values. For example, here we can say that settings are of type float. This means that this function will only accept a dictionary whose values are of type float, and the keys will always be of type string. So this example will work just fine. Now, if we go back to our previous example and create a brightness and a volume, and pass in something such as a string instead of a float, you'll notice that the code editor is going to complain. For more complex dictionary types, you're going to have to look into something called a typed dictionary, along with the unpack type. And both of those can be imported from typing. The downside is that this will require you to model your data. But then you can be very specific about what keyword arguments your kwargs accepts. As you can see here, passing in a name and an ID with the correct type works just fine. But passing in the wrong type or a non-existing keyword argument alerts the static type checker. ID should be of type integer, and the model has no age field. So this also will alert the static type checker. And just as a reminder, type annotations do not prevent our code from running. They just give us and Python extra context about what we are doing. If our program doesn't work as expected, we'll know exactly where things might have gone wrong. But now it's time for the final question. Can you combine args with kwargs? Yes, you can. And all the same rules apply here. For example, we might have a function called display that takes both args and kwargs. And all we're going to do here is print the args, the kwargs, and a separator. Then inside the display function, when we call it, we first pass in the args and then the kwargs. And we must do it in this order. Python will not allow us to define kwargs before args. So let's go back to what we had earlier and run this. And as an output, you'll notice the args and the kwargs, separated by this cool line. And my recommendation is that you only use args and kwargs for simple situations that require you to deal with an arbitrary amount of arguments. Just like when you use the built-in print function. Most of the time you won't use any of its other arguments, so specifying the first parameter to accept arguments as the default is a brilliant 5D chess move. I mean, look how easy it is to pass in multiple arguments to print. That's a massive win for quick printing. And I didn't mention this earlier, but if you have an iterable such as this one, you can unpack that directly into a function that accepts args. OMG, that is so elegant. As for kwargs, I personally rarely use it, considering how much effort it takes to set up. There's so much that can go wrong with accepting a bunch of random keyword arguments, so I generally try not to touch kwargs unless strictly necessary. Anyway, that just about concludes everything I wanted to talk about in today's video. Do let me know in the comment section down below whether you have any more comments or questions regarding args and kwargs. Otherwise, with all that being said, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.